For this section, I want to start off by introducing our first speaker, Rabia Moaz. Rabia Moaz is Senior Manager, Talent Acquisition with Tangerine, Canada's leading digital bank. She has over 8 years of experience as a talent acquisition professional. And prior to joining Tangerine, Rabia has held senior talent acquisition and recruitment roles with several multinational companies, including Indigo, Canada's largest bookstore chain, Scotiabank, one of Canada's leading multinational banks, as well as EY, one of the world's largest professional services partnership companies. She is also a former volunteer with the nonprofit charities Good Shepherd Ministries and Furniture Bank. Throughout her career, Rabia's passion has been connecting with people. She enjoys getting the opportunity to understand people's own passions, interests, and future goals to help them identify their next career move. Rabia, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Oshani, and welcome everyone. I'll be walking you all through the basics of building a strong CV, with the aim, of course, being to clearly articulate that your skills and accomplishments match up with the job's requirements, making you the best fit. So how can we go about doing that? What should we ensure to include on the resume? So firstly, you'll want to insert your name and contact information. So this is typically included right at the top of the page, and usually it's your full name that's provided at the top, and the font is larger than what you use for your contact information. And as for your contact information, what you'll want to provide is the best phone number to reach you at, your email address, indicate what city you reside in, and perhaps even a link to your LinkedIn profile. So this will allow the company to get easily in contact with you. And if you're selected to move ahead in the recruitment process, they know different things or different ways they can reach out to you, whether it be via email or phone. Now, if you're located outside the city or the country the job is based in, then I would recommend that you include somewhere on your resume, so maybe within the objective or at the bottom of the page, that you're willing to relocate. This will help ensure that your profile doesn't get passed up with the assumption that you're not here and that you're not able to work here. Next, you'll want to include a brief summary or your objective. So this is optional. You don't have to include it. And if you choose to include it, it typically sits as the first section below your name and contact information. You can write a short paragraph or a few bullet points outlining the key skills you possess and why you hope to land this role. You could include things you're passionate about, such as being a people leader, or you love building innovative products, or whatever else you feel is suitable to mention and something that really highlights your skills and experience. So next, we'll look at experience. I'd like to mention that for both experience and education, you'll want to stick with reverse chronological order, meaning listing from most recent to the oldest experience or education. So keep in mind, companies typically perform background checks as well, and whatever is stated here will be verified. So you'll want to do your best to ensure accuracy for job titles and dates of employment. So when you're writing about your experience, use bullet points to list your key skills and how you've applied them in the role, the results you achieved, and try to be quantitative wherever possible, and provide any other achievements and awards. So the standard format is to provide the company name, the location or city that company was located in, your job title, and start and end dates of your employment, followed of course by the responsibilities and achievements. So this is the section the recruiter and hiring manager are really paying attention to, and they want to do their best to understand if your experience matches with the role's requirements and responsibilities. So do remember to tailor your resume to the job you're applying to. You can use any of the key terms and the buzzwords that were included in the job description that apply to your experience and skills to really help the recruiter and the hiring manager connect the dots. So for education, if the highest form of education you've completed is high school, then do include that. But if you went on to pursue post-secondary education, such as college or university, then you don't need to include high school. You'll just want to list the name of the school and the program you studied, and it is optional to add dates for when you attended. You should also include any certificates or other courses you've obtained. And if for any reason you started a course or program, but you didn't end up completing it, you can note that. It's better to show that you completed some courses or credits versus excluding it altogether from your resume. And it's also better to ensure that the employer isn't under the impression that you completed something when you didn't. So it's great to be clear, but again, show all the work that you did do, any of the courses and education you did complete. You can also consider including additional sections to help provide the company with a better idea of who you are as a person. So things like volunteer work, projects, your portfolio and hobbies, and whatever you feel is relevant to the job. If you have career gaps, you can list it as well and share whatever information you're comfortable in providing. Lastly, you'll want to do your best to be clear and concise, double check your work, and make sure your CV is visually appealing. So keep in mind that when a hiring manager sees your resume, they look at it like an example of your work. So be sure to keep it organized, make sure it flows well, and that you're communicating what you want them to know about you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Rabia, for sharing your expertise on this topic. There's always so much to think about when building a CV, and it can understandably be overwhelming at times. So thank you so much for taking us through it step by step. As a reminder, there will be a question and answer period at the end of this session. If participants have any questions for Rabia at this time, I kindly ask that you share them in the chat and we will address them at the end. Next up, we have our second speaker, Sean Araujo. Sean Araujo is head of talent with Klarna Canada, a leading global retail bank, payments, and shopping service. He has been working as a talent acquisition professional since 2014. Prior to his current role with Klarna Canada, one of the most highly valued private fintech firms globally, Sean worked as a talent acquisition manager with the software company Sensible, as a senior talent acquisition specialist and recruitment lead with President's Choice Financial, as well as a talent manager with Fuse Create, an award-winning advertising and marketing agency. He has demonstrated working history in the technology services industry, as well as program building, management, and data analytics. In his free time, Sean has previously volunteered as a DEI committee member for Sensible, is a committee recruiter for TEDx Toronto, and currently as an advisor for TalentLift, where he's been a major resource volunteering his time and experience with candidates. Sean, you're up.
Thanks so much, Ashni. Super happy to be here today, everyone. So I'll jump in and piggyback off of some points that Rabia made in terms of strengthening your CV and looking at some do's and don'ts when developing it. So we'll start with some do's. The first point we'll call out is to include your accomplishments with each role or position within your CV. So it's not enough to write a version of your job description under each experience, but something to what Rabia was saying, including some business challenges you faced and what the results of those were. So a common term you'll hear in North America, let's say, is KPIs, which stand for key performance indicators. So an example of that is how instead of you've just been managing 4 people and writing that on your CV, maybe include that you also oversaw the promotion of 2 of your direct reports over a span of, let's call it 18 months. So it's not that you just described your responsibility, which was managing a team, but you went further and highlighted some of the accomplishments within that responsibility, which was to help promote 2 of those people on the team. Another example of this is stating that you're responsible for selling different products or services for your company, but also how you were able to achieve 100% or 120% of your sales targets for that year. So you're giving a concrete example as to what that responsibility was and what you did with that responsibility in terms of accomplishments. So that's the first point. The second one is ordering your work experience, your education, your volunteer experience languages, and any other categories by the relevancy of the role you are applying for and the strength of each category. So, for example, if you have a PhD, but little work experience, put education above work experience on your CV. If you have work experience, but the volunteer work you've done is more relevant to the role that you're applying for, move volunteering higher up on your CV. We should assume that the lower it is on your CV, the less likely that people will look at that part of your CV. So keep the most important and relevant things to the top. Another point is keep your CV to 2 or 3 pages. Quality over quantity. I would say aim for 2 pages. If you do have, extensive work experience, or if you're doing your master's or PhD and have a lot of publications, let's say, then that might extend to 3 pages. But really aim to keep it to 2. Another thing is formatting. Keep your CV clean and easy to read. Just because you're limiting yourself to, say, those 2-page limit, it doesn't mean you want to use all that real estate on the page. CV design could be the key to attracting the reader in the first place and getting those eyeballs reading the actual CV before they even realize what the content in it is. And creating a section for ATS to pick up on keywords. So ATS is being applicant tracking systems, which are the platforms that a lot of these companies use to process all the intake of resumes and CVs coming in. This means writing this section of having keywords that are friendly to ATSs just means writing 1 or 2 worded skills that are relevant to the roles you're applying to, that can be picked up by these ATS systems. That might move you up higher on the application pool. And similarly, if you do happen to have a LinkedIn profile, this is where the skill section of your LinkedIn profile comes in. So including those skills, not just the soft skills of communication and leadership and all those things, but if you're in software development, which is a field that I work in regularly, you want to do certain programming languages that you might have. So that'll move you up again when people are searching for you or processing your CV, they see those skill sets come through. So those are some of the examples of the do's that you want to do. Moving on to the next slide of the don'ts. So we'll go over some of these. First, I'll preface, and I don't think it made it to this version, but we'll send everyone an updated copy, is the personal information. So that's one thing that you definitely don't want to share on your CV. So that includes, anything like a photo of yourself. And I know a lot of times that can be tricky, especially for the more artistic CVs and whatnot. But other things can include marital status, or whether you have children or not. These are not things that the HR and hiring teams want to know, things about your personal life. They want to keep it completely professional. So I wouldn't share those elements on there. Moving on to the points in the slide, spelling mistakes. There's nothing that turns hiring managers away and recruiters away quicker than spelling mistakes on CVs. So this can be easily avoided by running the CV through a sort of spell check, which there are many free options, including Google Suite that offers just using Google Docs and running through the page to check for any spelling mistakes. Similarly, improper grammar can be another thing as well. So not always easy to spot and often difficult for foreign applicants to notice when creating their CV, but also important to keep in to speak to the ones that are relevant to the role. Lastly, on this slide is be careful not to interchangeably use present and past tense when you're writing your CV, which is a common mistake. The responsibilities you had or actions you took in your role should all be written in past tense, unless you're writing about your current role, which in case can be written in present tense. You are okay to just write everything in past tense as well, just to be consistent. Consistency is a word you'll often hear from us just when developing your CV. You want to make sure everything looks and sounds the same. So yes, keeping everything past tense, except for maybe your current role, which can be present. So moving on to the next slide, we wanted to show you a couple slides here of examples of what a poor CV is and what a strong CV is, just to put things into practice and actually seeing it in action. So here we took an example of a rather poor CV that has some issues with it. This is just a part of the CV, obviously not the whole thing, but quickly you'll realize here in this stock image that we pulled from the internet, it has poor formatting. Comparing the two roles that you see side by side, you don't have bullet points on one, you have bullet points on the other. Again, consistency is key. Whatever you're gonna do, just make sure that you do it across the whole CV. Now, we do have recommendations of potentially having bullet points for everything rather than not having them, just because again, it's a little easier on the eye and it attracts the reader. So in this case, I would recommend to this person to have bullet points on their first. A second thing that you can see there is no mention of particular achievements or goals accomplished. So it was very much just what their responsibilities were, and that's it. As someone who is assessing the CV, they really want to see, okay, what did you do with that responsibility? What were you able to accomplish given that role? So that's a part there, especially, a more senior position as a chief marketing officer, you'd want to see a lot more there in terms of what they were able to achieve. Another thing there is no description of previous work experience. So in the bottom role there, all they have is sometimes just one word to describe something. That doesn't help the person who's assessing the CV to understand really what you did. You really want to go into detail and describe, at least in a sentence, maybe two, some of the roles and responsibilities that you did. And the previous work experience, again, on the bottom there, is in present tense. This person's no longer working there. They haven't been working there for several years. You really want to reword it so that it's things that you did and not things that you're doing currently for that company. And here we have an example of a stronger CV where the individual created a very appealing CV in just one page. So first, the contact information is formatted well and includes a hyperlink to their LinkedIn page. My only feedback with that in this situation is that all four sections, so the email, the number, the location, and the LinkedIn profile, if it could fit all in one line, just to give it a bit more room for everything else would be great. Otherwise, that's just maybe a minor point. And as you see, this individual had to decide what sections got the majority of the page on the left side, which section got the smaller column to the right. Because this candidate has worked on some relevant projects, they rightfully decided to give projects more space, more real estate than the education section. So this is something that I mentioned in the do's section earlier, where you want to allow categories of your profile with greater strength and relevance to the job you're applying to at the top of the page or at the dominant part of the page. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the slide, I like the look of it. It has a lot of information, but it's formatted in a way that it still allows the reader to follow along without being overwhelming. The skill section includes actual hard skills relevant to the industry that this individual is working in, which in this case is marketing. So you don't want to just have things like I mentioned before, communication or leadership. Those are words that, although important, doesn't say much about the individual. Whereas if they put SEO and content marketing, they have certain skills of certain platforms that could be relevant to what the company might be looking for. And lastly, driving this point home, they use past tense for all their past work experience and project experience while writing their career objective in a present tense above, as you see. So that's, again, the consistency factor that we want to see in CV building.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Sean, for outlining those do's and don'ts so clearly. It's great to see those visuals. It really helps put things into perspective when we're able to see samples side by side. So thank you so much for that. Moving on, we are going to now focus on how to address unique displacement circumstances in a CV. A unique challenge that some of our displaced candidates may experience is deciding how and when to reflect certain non-traditional items on their CV. This may include breaks in work, career shifts, uninterrupted education, potentially due to their refugee circumstances. Sean and Rabia will provide tips on how to address and reflect some of these unique circumstances when building a strong CV. Sean and Rabia, the floor is yours.
All right, me again. So yeah, I'll jump right in. So candidates who come from countries with political unrest may not always be able to work in industries or careers that they are trained, specialized, or desire to work in for various reasons. Here are just some of the things to help overcome gaps in someone's careers and strengthen their CV. So first, highlighting transferable skills that have been developed in roles you have done, and how it can be applied to the role that you're applying for. So, a lot of the things that are soft skills that you've developed in one job that has nothing to do with the job that you're trying to apply for, but can still be transferred on. So communication, leadership, team building, all those things that no matter what industry you're in, you're still developing those skill sets. You also want to share classes or tutorials, projects, as we saw in that past CV, that you've done on your own time that are relevant to the role you're applying for. A great tool would be some sort of portfolio to show your skills that might not be easily reflected on a CV as well. So if your work experience doesn't quite garner that attention, but the projects that you've worked on does, make sure to include that and make it a dominant part of your CV. And also highlighting volunteer experience that is related to the role that you're applying for. So that'll go hand in hand really with the things that we've talked about in the past. So the projects or the classes, volunteering is right up there as well as something that you can definitely showcase to wherever you're applying to. So those are just some of the points that I wanted to share as well. I'll hand it over to Rabia.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is really building on a few of the things Sean and I have already spoken on, but one of the points being career change. So you may be in a position that you're looking for work and you're really open to any opportunity where you can apply your skills. So in that case, you may choose to write a cover letter with the aim being to explain why your experience isn't an exact match and why you're looking to make a career change. Or instead of a cover letter, you can incorporate it into an objective or a summary that's on the earlier portion of your resume. So as Sean mentioned earlier, be sure to really lean in to your transferable skills. You want to focus, or you don't want to focus too much on what you don't have, but highlight the skills and relevant experience you do have. Now, at the same time, it's always great to show that you're self-aware and that you do understand that there will be some learning involved, and which specific aspects you're looking forward to learning more about, and approach it with optimism. So, for example, if you're applying to a people manager role, then highlight that you've managed people, although it may have been a completely different industry or a completely different role, and what was involved. So you can note that you've had, performance discussions, and like Sean had said, you helped promote to individuals or whatever that is, as well as tracking progress, etc. So you'll want to really focus on those transferable skills that can apply to that new career. Secondly, gaps in a CV. So traditionally, you'd only include your work experience on your CV. But what if you've had some breaks in between? Perhaps you and your family had to move, or you took a parental leave, or some unforeseen circumstances came about and you were left without work. So although your instinct may be not to mention those elements, it can actually be more helpful than harmful to put it on your resume. So for example, instead of showing a 2-year gap between 2 work experiences, leaving the employer wondering what may have happened and forming their own conclusions as to why you were out of work, include a heading as you would for a job, noting parental leave and the time period it covered. Or perhaps writing, family relocating and the time period. So society is changing and there's far more compassion and understanding, and we know things come up and it can cause a disruption in our lives. So whatever you're comfortable adding, if you can provide a little brief explanation, it is very helpful to provide that so the reader on the other end has an understanding and it's not something that harms your candidacy for a position.
Thank you so much, Rabia and Sean, for your insightful points and for providing some creative solutions to the unique set of circumstances displaced candidates may face. This concludes the substantive portion of our webinar. Now we'd love to hear from our participants. So at this point, everyone is welcome to turn on their videos at this time. And if you wish to ask a question, please raise your hand through the Zoom feature. Those asking a question, of course, can unmute themselves then. Thank you so much for those who have also shared questions in the chat box so far. I will first go through some of those questions so that our speakers can address them, and then I'll open the floor for anyone else who'd like to ask a question. So the first chat box question that we received is from Janik at UNHCR Columbia, and this was asked right at the end of Rabia's overview. And she asks, I understand that those are recommendations applying for an experience-based type of resume, but what about competency-based type of resumes or mixed ones? Would you recommend those types of resumes? What would be the basic recommendations? So experience versus competency-based CVs.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can absolutely approach your resume in a more competency-based way. And that may apply more to, for example, like tech-skilled individuals or certain positions where really it's heavily focused on your skills. And so you might actually provide a full summary and all the bullet points of the work you've done, the tools you've used, different projects, you know, anything that you've done all up top. And then underneath, you might say work experience and just list the employer, your job title, and the time frame. And that's it, just little snippets at the bottom, especially if your role was more or less the same at multiple organizations. And especially if you are a consultant or a contractor, that can typically be how you have functioned. So absolutely, I have no reservations or anything negative to say, but I would say that typically applies to a very specific type of skill set or professional. And so if it was the same type of work, absolutely. However, if you have been elevating your career, you went from a junior analyst to a senior to a people manager, you wouldn't be able to really articulate all of that in that format. So just think about what makes sense for your client or for yourself.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that as well, I think you don't want to get caught up in a situation that you're just putting your hard skills, right? So if we're on the topic of software development, you're just putting your programming skills. Those are important, of course, and you should have them probably at a dominant part of your CV, as we mentioned. But you also want to talk about, if it was a product-led company that you were working at, what part of that company were you involved with, right? If you had certain sprints or certain projects, what was your involvement in that? What was the result of those things? So again, driving in that result based, I think that's what people want to see, not just the skills that you have, but what impact did you have in the organization as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to move on to the next chat box question, and it's from Juan Sanchez. And he asks, in terms of design, are there any suggestions regarding specific industries? For example, healthcare versus software versus other industries, in terms of design, resume, organization, etc. Are there specific suggestions for these specific industries?
I can start with that one. That one's tough because I will say it is a little subjective in terms of what people do want to see in a CV. I think the example, if maybe we want to go back a few slides to the strong CV, I think a layout like that it is very appropriate for pretty much any industry. It's got a little bit of color to it. That's okay. I think if you're something in graphic design or maybe even marketing or something, you can be a little bit more aggressive in the colors that you're using. I know some people in more, creative spaces do include their photos. I would caution that just, not every organization is open to that. So you don't want to limit yourself, but still, lean in a little heavier on some of the more bolder colors and designs. That's definitely okay. But I think you want to look, you don't want to have something that's super basic, because again, that can get lost in the shuffle a little bit. So it's okay to be a little bit creative, no matter what industry you're in. And maybe having that sort of 2-column approach, where one column's a little thicker, the other one's a little more narrow with some smaller points. I think a layout like that you're seeing it more and more now, rather than just one column of everything written. Again, to fit everything in, but within a digestible way still.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo a lot of what Sean said. Given some of the experience where I've worked with consulting, retail banking, or banking, sorry, in retail, there isn't a one size fits all. This is a great example of a strong resume that you could be in any industry, but it is also a bit of personal preference, personal choice. So thinking about expressing yourself, but also remembering this is that professional document you are submitting, and what area you work in. So if you are in something a bit more creative, having a bit more color or creativity versus a bit more, I don't want to say plain, but a bit simpler in the colors and just standard conveying information. So no one size fits all, but there's a lot of wonderful templates available out there that are also free to use. And it's really about what works for you and what fits all of what you want to get across.
Wonderful. So we do have a secondary chat box question from Janik, UNHCR Columbia, and she asks, our speakers address part of her question, but since refugees often have to work informally for some time, how should candidates present this? So in other words, if someone has perhaps getting paid under the table without authorization, as often happens, my suspicion is that this wouldn't matter on a CV, and you'd simply want to emphasize the experience and not include private status information. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. So I would say you can list it as, under, again, work experience, because it is a work experience. You're not, be careful with your title. If you're employment, then you may not want to include that, because it will need to be validated to make sure you were employed. And, again, I don't know if it's depending on were you actually an employee or were they just paying you under the table, having you do the work. So you want to be thoughtful around what titles you're using, because that is what will be used to confirm that information. But if you just include it as, experience, you included the work you did, all of that should be fine. Again, when time comes and you're having a conversation with the recruiter, you can always disclose what that situation was, because typically you'll have to either provide a reference or you'll be filling out a form where they validate your experience, and that's where you may choose to not include that information, and you don't want this employer reaching out to that company. But there's usually, you can have good communication with your recruiter for that company and that position that can help you navigate that sticky situation. Sean, anything to add from you on that one?
No, I think that one's pretty straightforward. I definitely think you should don't hold back on things that will help you attain that job, that position that you're looking for. If you gain that experience through some means, yes, you want to be careful, again, as Rabia was saying, with the wording, but I think if you put it under work experience and keep it very high level as to the type of role that you were doing, the position, you don't necessarily need to go into the specific company, then yeah, I think that would be fine.
Great, thanks a lot. So I'm going to open the floor now to any of participants who'd like to ask a question. Feel free to raise your hand, and then you'd be able to unmute yourself when I call your name.
We did get just one more chat box question.
Okay. Perfect. Actually, yeah, let me ask this one, and then we can open the floor again. So I have a question from Janik as well. So do you have any recommendations on how to adapt a resume? What type of research you need to do, and how would that impact your resume's format?
Can I rectify my question? Because I think I forgot one really important word, and it was based on the, and how to adapt your resume, but based on the job offer. I know it's pretty basic question, but I think it's something really important. So that's why I ask.
For sure. Thank you so much for that clarification, Janik. Rabia and Sean, do you have who wants to go first?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, is just how to change it based on the role that you're applying for or the industry that you're applying for. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mean that you definitely want to have an overall identity that you want to present, right? So you don't want to veer too much one way or another. I think your work experience is your work experience. That's not going to change too much. Your skills, that's potentially an area that, okay, if I'm, I revert back to the industry that I work in. So in the tech industry, if I'm applying to a health tech company versus a fintech company versus an education tech company, I might change some of the things that they might be looking for. But again, a lot of those things will be similar. I'm not going to change it too much. The projects I might work on, that again might be modified slightly based on the relevancy. But I would say, if I had to pull it a percentage in terms of how much you really want to stick to what your identity is, let's say it's 75, 80%, and then the last 20 you maybe adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think where it can be helpful is, for example, in a job description, it might say they're looking for an individual who has experience delivering presentations to C-suite executives and building dashboards with KPIs, etc. So those are the things you want to try to make sure you're addressing, because if that's on the top of their job description, they really want someone who has that experience. You may want to make sure you've included a bullet point around those buzzwords or keywords that, you've got dashboards, you're working with data, you're delivering presentations. Like, those are the main things you want to ensure are incorporated. And many of the jobs, again, you've got that one identity, you're typically applying to similar jobs at different industries or organizations. So it won't veer too much, but there might be slight adjustments in the terminology, the lingo, those keywords that you might tweak a little bit here and there.
And also, one of the things that we quickly discussed was the career objectives at the top of the CV page, right? So that's just really a couple of sentences, maybe 2 to 3 sentences about what you're looking for, what sort of drives you, what motivates you. And I think there is where you can maybe tweak that intro a little bit depending on the industry that you're working in. So, the same, it might not be the same reasons why I would apply in the finance industry to why I would apply in the health industry, right? So I would want to probably change that and show a little bit of personality there in that section.
Perfect. So there was another chat in the question in the chat box from Kevin Escana. Would you mind opening up your mic and asking the question on the live session?
Hello, everybody. Yes, I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, the camera as well. Okay. I wanted to ask, here from Hayas, we faced the fact that some candidates do not have access to a laptop, so they have to edit their formatting of the CV through their cell phones. And maybe having a more complex format for the CV is quite challenging. So in this kind of situations, if the format is vertical, can get very long, which are your recommendations?
That's a great question. Happy to answer. I would say that really the format, I wouldn't say is too much of an issue. I would just say that can definitely be more challenging using your mobile phone to build that out. If you're using Word and later converting to PDF or whatever the case is, typically you can zoom in. It will be a lot more time intensive. So I promise you it's not the easiest way. But typically if you're using the same sort of tool, like if it's Word, then if it's one page on your phone, it will still be one page when it is, delivered to a recruiter or applied with. So it shouldn't really be an issue, but it's just very challenging. So I don't know if they have access to a public setting like a library or somewhere else where they're able to go in and have access to a computer to go over their work, because we have worked with some individuals who didn't have a cell phone, didn't have a computer, and had to go into the library because they went into the office physically to hand their resume. And then we had to wait for several days to email them until they access a public computer, reply to our email. And that's okay, as long as you communicate it. You know, a lot of employers are more than willing to accommodate and adjust. But I would say, yeah, again, always keeping your resume about 2, max 3 pages. And typically, if you are junior to, you know, mid-level in your career, you can probably fit everything into 1 to 2 pages. Really, if you're getting into a much more senior position, or like Sean had mentioned, you have completed your PhD, you've got, you know, various publications that might go on for longer. But nonetheless, you could use your cell phone. It will be a pain, but you'll be able to achieve the result with a lot more time, but it is possible. So I would just recommend, you know, perhaps whoever is helping review can provide that second set of eyes, double check that everything is in fact looking correct.
Yeah. This one's a really tough question because I sympathize for people that are in those situations. You know, I think a couple of real things that you can try. I mean, Google Drive, I believe, is a free service for anyone. If you want to write it up in Google Docs on your phone, I believe you'll be able to save as PDF from there. That would be one option. And also, you know, worst case scenario, LinkedIn is also free to create a profile. You can create essentially your profile on LinkedIn and treat it the same way that you would treat a CV, by putting all the roles and all the responsibilities within those, and actually export it as a CV. So worst case scenario, you have that as an option if you don't have a laptop to actually create your own. That would be kind of a last resort that people can definitely lean on if needed.
All right, great. Next up, I'm going to call on Tiago to open up his mic and ask his question as well.
Hi, my question has partially been answered by the previous question about design and length of the CV, but it's mostly related for when you have to choose between design versus length. Like, for example, the image of the strong CV that we're using here right now with 2 columns can sometimes look a bit crowded depending on how much you're trying to fit into that. Would it be an issue to, in this case, move it to a second page? Some people are very against CVs that have more than 1 page. They say that it has to be extremely condensed, extremely objective. But I tend to think that it's better to convey the message that you need to convey with your CV versus trying to squeeze it all into 1 page just for the sake of the template. So what do you think about that?
I share that sentiment as well. I think you definitely want to convey what it is that you have to offer, and within reason, of course. I'll preface it that saying that if it is within 2, I think you're safe to do so. You're probably being a little risky if you're going already to a 3rd page with it, but with 2 pages, if you want to really finding your design in terms of what you think fits all the information that you have, right? So this person that we had as an example, Jocelyn Delgado, you know, it sounds like she didn't have enough to justify a 2nd page, and I think it's wise to keep it to 1 page. If you're moving into a 2nd page and taking up a quarter of that 2nd page, I'd say try to condense it within 1, because you don't want all that blank space. But you also don't want just a bunch of words just for the sake of words either, right? So it's about strategy. Do you have enough to fully commit to a 2nd page? If so, I think go for it and tell that story in a bit more in depth. And then from there, once you're at that 2-page limit, let's say, work backwards. Start thinking more about how can I condense what I'm trying to say in a more succinct way.
I'll just add that one of the challenges, I think, on the recruitment end is that when there's a resume that's greater than 2 pages, like realistically, a recruiter opens up their resume, we scan the first page and we know the keywords already. And the longer we read, the less attention we spend, and if it's not interesting or the right fit, on to the next, right? So you don't want to risk having too much information and you're hoping we get to page 3 to really see what you were all about, right? So try and get the most important information first page. If you really need to elaborate and continue on, great. But don't count on that second page or further really being read to make a decision on how well of a fit you might be for this role. So that's where you want to be very strategic and make sure that you're clear, you're concise, you really called out the work you do. And if need be, go on to page 2 or 3 and so on, hopefully not more than that. But know that the attention span and the availability of time for a recruiter is very, very short. So you want to make that impression in that first page.
Yeah, don't save the best for last on your resume. Definitely start off with the strong points, you know, treat it like a sales pitch where you go in with your best offer, and then the secondary stuff is more the fluff that you want to add that will also strengthen it, but go in with your strongest points for sure.
All right, thanks.
All right, these are great questions. Moving on, Cecilia, I see your hand raised. You're up next.
Hi, Hi, I'm from Ecuador, and I have a question regarding some people, well, the refugees have some difficult time trying to get jobs. They do a lot of informal work, and by that at work, they're sometimes embarrassed, and they don't want to show it, but that's going to put a gap in their CV. How can they address that gap without saying, I'm going to make it up, I was selling candies on the street to feed my family, without feeling that their work was less because of their situation? They left a really good job because of the country situation. They come to another third world country where they face a better situation, but it's not something they're proud of, where they don't want to show that part.
Yeah. I mean, this one's tough because I don't want to speak to every situation. I don't know if my response would be applicable to all scenarios. But, you know, in a situation where someone had to do something to make a living, to get by from day to day, you know, there's nothing wrong in saying that they ran their own business in that situation, right? And if it's odd jobs, you know, it doesn't have to be the same job every day. You can be doing essentially whatever you need to do to survive. You've run your own business of miscellaneous tasks. And again, that's where you can open the door to those transferable skills that you've possessed. So business development in terms of reaching out to different people to see what their needs were and servicing those needs. You know, building a network of people where you could potentially help one group with another because you've built that clientele. You know, and just managing your expenses because you're charging these people whatever it is that you're charging, and you may need to make sure that you're keeping your expenses in check to balance that out. So you're using a lot of those things, communication skills, obviously, if you're, you know, doing whatever you need to do and servicing those things. So that opens the door to maybe saying this is more of an entrepreneurial slot within my resume that I took advantage of.
If I could add as well, because it actually brings me back to an example. I had a couple of, or actually last year, and an individual had moved here. They had professional experience from their country before they moved here, but they took on a role at like Subway and then Best Buy, and it's retail, it's food, it's, you know, all these other jobs that they didn't quite feel proud of. But I love the way that they actually put on the resume that they had a line that said various employment or temporary employment and a time period. They didn't actually note all the different employers and their job as a cashier or, you know, flipping burgers, because they didn't really want to really put it out there. But when I got on a call with them, they were very just honest and said, look, you know, I've been taking on a lot of these different jobs. I'm trying to support my family. I have employment here. I did this, I did that, I did this. But for the sake of my resume, to make sure it's still relevant, basically they put a few bullets saying, you know, working with customers, to Sean's point, you know, like building business development or whatever that is that aligns, to really showcase the skills, the transferable skills. And when you're talking on the phone with someone, you can be a bit more forthcoming about what that specific circumstance was.
Great.
And also to that point as well, you know, I think it not only shows the soft skills you developed, I think it opens the door to starting that conversation too about your resiliency and resourcefulness to find whatever you need to do. So assuming you have the hard skills for the job that you're applying for, because at the end of the day, that is important in order to be hired. But then there's that human element of also, why do we want this human being for this position, right? And I think if you're showing all the soft skills, but also showing things like resilience and doing what you need to do to support your family and the resourcefulness of finding different employments, I think that's a great element as well that you can definitely try to reflect in that CV.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for that question. So we do have a couple more minutes left. I see Veronica and Zara's heads up. I'm going to ask that you ask your questions back to back, and we'll have our speakers hopefully try to address it in the next 2 minutes or so.
Sure. I'll jump in first, and it may have been addressed already, but it was just a question about the length of the work experience, about how far back you should go, because you may want to include things that are relevant to the position you're applying to, but what if it is maybe like over 10 years, how would that be addressed? And Zara.
Yeah. Sorry, Sean. You guys did touch a little bit on this, but we've seen some candidates where a lot of their knowledge in their field is more theoretical. They, have maybe several degrees at a higher level of education in a field, but not so much practical experience because they spent so much time on their education. So I wonder how you would address that in a CV a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm going to give the speakers a minute to respond if that's okay.
I'll try. I'll speak really quickly. No, I think definitely yes to the 10 years or further back. If it's relevant to the role, please don't exclude something just because you think it's outdated. Like I think it's very important how you bridge that gap between that role a long time ago, let's say, to something recent. Again, it depends on how much real estate you have left in the CV. You can do gaps or include the gaps with some sort of context, like various employments, things like that. But yes, definitely include that. And then in terms of the sort of the academia side of things, I definitely think trying to include a bit of, so if you're coming straight out of school, first of all, putting education at the top gives you a bit more room to explain and give a bit of context. So if you're talking about theses or any projects you did within that field that could help give that employer the sense of, let's give this person a chance because it's not just theory, but they actually put it into practice within that realm of education. I think that would be the step where you're actually showing certain skill sets as well as just a degree of some sort and your grade, right? So anything that you can do that helps bridge that gap. So any volunteer work you did, the thesis, all that kind of stuff, definitely include that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sean.
Can I just quickly share my thoughts on that just really quick? So on the first question, I would say if it was about 10 years back, again, keeping in mind, does it make it to page 2? And if it does, then maybe incorporate something in your objective to say, leveraging prior experience with blah, blah, blah. That way it's still top of mind. And then the person goes, oh, where is that listed? And you flip through. So do include it. And then for the second question, I would even suggest don't only rely on resumes. You want to have a resume, but that's where you need to really encourage those candidates to network, to talk to people, to connect, because when it comes to really giving people a job based on how awesome they are and not just their skills, like practice skills, that's where you have to have an opportunity to actually meet and connect, right? So build those relationships, network, have a chat, help them build their networking skills as well to land some opportunities. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly wrap up. So as we do wrap up, I want to share one last thing with everyone. After this webinar, and once available, TalentLift will share a few tools with all participants, and this will include what's listed on the slide, so a CV development tips document, as well as a CV template document. And these resources have been developed with input from both of our speakers today, as well as some of our partners. And we will also share a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides when they are available. So thank you to everyone for coming out today to today's webinar. We appreciate all of you taking the time to be here today. A special thanks goes out to our speakers as well. Your time and expertise today has been greatly appreciated. If anyone has any remaining questions that were not answered today, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to get in touch with any member of the TalentLift team. We hope that today's session was informative and impactful for the work that we do every day, helping candidates to put their best foot forward. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone.